sometimes a film comes along and it's so poised to be hyped and just, excessively, labored in praise and adulation, everyone joking themselves off over it online. Oh my god, it's the best thing ever, blah, blah, blah. To the point where you anticipate this reaction to that, this sort of, perhaps we could consider contrarian response, trying to remark that, oh, this is too easy, this is too pandering, it could have been doing this. It opted for the easy way out, all this expressive long take nonsense, all of this, all style, no substance. It's just indulgence of cinematography, and there's no room for any other exploration of any characters. This is just indulgence in the medium for its own sake. I think if The Revenant's the kind of film which, I don't think it would have that response if the film was poorly received, rather, and it didn't make a splash at the Oscars. I think it would be kind of a Terrence Malick's The New World situation. Obviously, we're talking about quite different films, obviously, but what we have is something which is, totally indulgent, and we have to decide whether the decision to call this indulgent is kind of a bizarre cultural praxis, this bias that we've been brought up in. To what degree, when are the visual arts indulgent? Cinema has the distinction of being considered something of a text-based medium as well. So when the film is totally involved with the visual component and not quite as invested in the narrative component, except for giving some structure to the visual, to some degree this is invalid, or to some that is valid, although the issue is that The Revenant, being so aware of the praise it might receive from certain internet forum kind of frat boy types, that they become put off by the film entirely. And I'll be honest, I'm not the greatest fanatic over Leonardo DiCaprio's acting in any instance, though where he does shine is kind of grunting and acting angry, and so I think The Revenant was the perfect role for him. I think this is probably the best performance of his career. Whether it deserved a great award or not, I don't know, but at least they gave him it for the performance that I feel was his most impressive. It's funny because I take a film I've seen a few times, like Martin Scorsese's The Departed. There are some scenes wherein I find him working, but then there are other scenes wherein I feel as though it's too soap opera-y. That's just my perspective. In any case, Alejandro G. Iñárritu and Emmanuel Lubezki, they collided here to compose one of the most both entertaining in a visceral kind of very, very obvious and kind of red meat sense. And then there's also the kind of immaculate, oh, I'm jealous of this film production aspect going on as well, plus something one is in awe of. It's one of the, in the 2010s, it's more difficult to undertake these big, large-scale, risky productions, because the media is going to be all over it, social media, everyone's going to be prospectively talking about it. It's difficult to hide those large-scale productions. In the 80s, Fitzcarraldo was controversial enough. You couldn't do it now, for perhaps rightly so, some would argue. I would to an extent as well, frankly. Something like The Revenant, it's difficult to fund those sort of projects. The Revenant might have made a lot of money, but it was still a gamble, and it's not something they're willing to necessarily do again. We'll sooner see films like The Revenant be done entirely in CG, and that will be okay by me, potentially, as long as the CGI has a sense of, for example, we have to imagine CGI being the film that would have been shot outdoors, although we're using the CGI so we don't actually have to go outdoors, while it's retaining the same effect. Not a creatively corners cut, it's poorly phrased, but you know what I mean. Not a lazy reskinning of something which could have been done better outdoors. We want CGI to be what could have been done outdoors and then some. And I think this is The Revenant's genius in employing, for example, is the bear attack, the stampede sequence. This is where the film really shines. And then it employs the natural light photography to its final ultimate advantage. Total sensory experience, not necessarily the kind of thing which, if you want a novel, read the novel it was based off of. AOD endorses The Revenant, I suppose. I suppose the reason I feel like discussing this film is because I remember the hype leading up to this film, and it was one of those things where people couldn't wait for this to come out, but this will be the greatest film of all time forever, and we'll keep talking about it forever. Interestingly enough, it has retained something of that reputation. Still considered a legendary film and something of a modern classic, which is interesting. Few films, Birdman, which another film I quite liked from the same director, which did win the Best Picture the previous year, did not receive to the same level of adulation to this day. It's considered a bit smarmy and smug and too screenplay heavy now, and a bit too kind of obvious about, you know, like who is that character even. I happen to like that film a lot due to the dynamic performances, the inventive cinematography, and the peculiar percussion soundtrack. But nevertheless, I think The Revenant has proven to be probably Iñárritu's best film overall, I might argue. Let me know if you have any thoughts of your own and you would wish to share those. And if you are so inclined, share them here. Thanks again, my good and dear friends.